They say a first-class ticket buys you comfort, but for a man who looks like me, it usually just buys a front-row seat to a different kind of circus. Sit down for a minute. Brother, I need to get this off my chest because it's been sitting there like a bucket of cold lead. I'm an old hand at this game. Been around the block more times than I can count. And I've built a life most people only see in magazines. But none of that mattered 30,000 feet in the air on a Tuesday night. Before I tell you about the moment my stomach turned over, I want to ask you something. Where are you reading this from right now? Whether you're on a porch in Georgia or a high-rise in Chicago, drop it in the comments. I want to know who's sitting here with me. And if you've ever felt that cold wind of being out of place even when you paid for your spot, hit that subscribe button. We need to stick together because the stories I have to tell, they aren't in the brochures. I had just finished a 3-day marathon in San Francisco. We were closing a merger that would change the landscape of logistics in this country. I'm talking about a deal with enough zeros to make a banker's head spin. By the time I headed to the airport, I was drained. My brain felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper. I didn't want to be the CEO. I didn't want to be the guy in the 3-piece suit giving the keynote. I just wanted to be a man going home to his wife. So, I changed. I traded the Italian silk for a heavy gray hoodie, some broken-in joggers, and my old sneakers, the ones that have seen me through 1,000 morning walks. I looked like any other middle-aged guy trying to catch a red-eye. Or, more accurately, I looked like a guy some people think doesn't belong in the front of the plane. When I walked down that jet bridge, I was carrying a heavy leather bag and a lot of exhaustion. I stepped onto the plane, and the recycled air hit me. That sterile, plastic smell that always reminds me of how far I am from solid ground. I saw the lead flight attendant standing there. Her name tag said Linda. She was mid-40s, hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked like it was trying to pull her eyebrows off her forehead. She was laughing with a pilot. But the second my foot hit the carpet of the first-class cabin, the laughter died. It didn't just stop. It vanished, like she'd stepped into a funeral. I held out my boarding pass. I didn't say a word, just gave her a small, tired smile. She didn't take the pass. She just squinted at it, then looked at my hoodie, then looked at my face with a look that was somewhere between suspicion and pure annoyance. It's a look I've known since I was a kid in Detroit. It's the, "What are you doing here?" Look, the back of the plane is through there. "Sir," she said, her voice clipping every syllable like she was cutting wire. I didn't move. I just pointed to the big 1A printed on the pass. "I'm right here, Linda," I said softly. She snatched the pass then, her eyes darting over the seat number and the first-class branding. She didn't apologize. She didn't welcome me aboard. She just handed it back like it was a piece of trash she'd found on the floor. "Fine. Seats on the left. Keep the aisle clear." I sat down and pushed my bag under the seat. The leather felt cool under my hands, but my skin felt hot. That old, familiar fire was starting to flicker in my gut. It's a heart-ripping pain. You know, to spend your whole life building a mountain just so people can't look down on you, only to find out they'll still find a way to do it from the same level. A few minutes later, a young guy sat down in 1B. He couldn't have been more than 25. He was wearing a crisp white dress shirt, no tee, and had a pair of those expensive noise-canceling headphones around his neck. A tech bro, if I ever saw one. Linda was back in an instant. Her face went from granite to sunshine in half a second. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Harrison. Can I get you a pre-departure mimosa? Or maybe some warm macadamia nuts?" Her voice was like honey. The kid smiled and asked for the mimosa. Then she turned to me. The honey turned back into vinegar. She didn't ask my name. She didn't offer a mimosa. "Do you want water?" she asked. Just like that. "No, sir. No welcome. Sparkling water would be great." "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice level. She huffed. A literal, audible huff. She walked away and came back 5 minutes later. She handed Mr. Harrison a crystal glass of orange juice and champagne. Then she reached over him and handed me a plastic cup. A flimsy, clear plastic cup filled with lukewarm tap water. No ice, no bubbles, just a piece of plastic that belonged in a dentist's office. I looked at the cup, and then I looked at her. She didn't even stay long enough to see my reaction. She was already back to flirting with the kid in 1B, asking him about his trip to the city. I felt the weight of that plastic cup in my hand. It felt heavier than the millions of dollars I'd moved that morning. It felt like a symbol. "You can pay for the seat," the cup said, "but you're still just a guest in our house." I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. The engine started to whine, a low-frequency hum that vibrates in your teeth. I tried to tell myself to let it go. "Marcus, you're too big for this," I whispered to myself. But that's the thing about being a black man in this country. You're never too big to be made to feel small. It's like 1,000 little paper cuts. One doesn't kill you, but after a lifetime, you're just bleeding from everywhere. Once we reached cruising altitude, the cabin lights dimmed, and the smell of food started to waft through the air. Usually, I love that smell. It's the smell of the end of a long day. The menu in first class was supposed to be something special. Seared wagyu or a lobster bisque. I watched Linda move down the aisle with the trolley. She was being so careful with everyone else, leaning in, whispering recommendations like she was their personal concierge. When she got to 1B, she spent 3 minutes talking to Mr. Harrison about the wine pairings. When she finally shifted her body toward me, she didn't even bring the trolley level with my seat. She stood half a step back. "We're out of the steak," she said. No greeting. No, "Would you like to hear the specials?" Just a flat-out lie. I'd seen the trays. I knew there were at least 4 steaks left. "Is that so?" I asked. I could feel the tech bro next to me shift uncomfortably. He wasn't a bad kid. I could see the confusion in his eyes. He knew what was happening. "Yes, we have a cold chicken salad left. Take it or leave it," Linda said. She was looking over my head, staring at the exit sign like it was the most interesting thing in the world. "I'll take the salad." "Linda," I said. My voice was a low rumble now. I was done being tired. I was starting to get that cold. Sharp focus I get when a negotiation is going south. She disappeared for a moment and came back with a tray. She didn't set it down on my tray table. She held it about 2 inches above the surface and just dropped it. The plastic cup of water sloshed over, soaking the edge of the linen napkin. She didn't offer to clean it up. She just turned on her heel and walked away. I looked down at the tray. It looked sad. The chicken was pale. The lettuce was wilting at the edges. But then, a scent hit me. It wasn't the smell of dressing. It was something sharp, something pungent and earthy. It smelled like a basement that had been flooded and left to rot for a month. I picked up the small sourdough roll that was tucked into the corner of the tray. It felt light, almost hollow. I turned it over, and my heart didn't just sink. It stopped. The entire bottom of the roll was a vibrant, fuzzy, velvet blue. It wasn't a speck of mold. It was a colony. It looked like a miniature forest of decay had sprouted right there in the middle of first class. It was sapphire blue and toxic looking, spreading its roots into the bread like a disease. I sat there, frozen. I looked at the mold, and then I looked at the back of Linda's head, as she laughed with another flight attendant near the galley. A cold, jagged shard of something old and ugly settled right behind my ribs. This wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally serve a piece of bread that's been rotting for a week to a passenger in 1A. You do it because you don't think they're worth the effort of looking at the tray. You do it because you want to see if they'll swallow it. I felt the heat rising in my chest, a slow boil anger that made my fingertips tingle. I looked at the moldy roll, then looked at the call button above my head, my finger hovering just an inch away from the plastic. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, louder than the jet engines, as I realized that the quiet part of the trip was officially over. I reached up and pressed the button, the chime ringing out through the silent cabin like a gunshot. The blue light of the cabin seemed to dim, focusing all its cold energy on that single, fuzzy piece of bread sitting in front of me. I let my finger linger on the call button, the small plastic square feeling like a trigger. I didn't just want a new roll. I wanted an acknowledgement that I existed. In this cabin, surrounded by the hum of the jet engines and the soft clinking of silverware from people who didn't have to look twice at their food, I felt like an invisible man who had suddenly become an eyesore. The chime hadn't even faded before I saw Linda's head pop up from behind the galley curtain. She didn't move toward me with the grace you'd expect in a cabin that costs 5 figures to sit in. She moved with a heavy-footed stomp, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated irritation. She looked at the light above my seat like it was a personal insult I'd hurled at her. "I'm busy with the dessert service for the other passengers," she snapped as she reached my row, her voice loud enough to make the woman in 2B look over her shoulder. "Is this really necessary? I already told you we were out of the steak." I didn't look up at her right away. I kept my eyes on the bread. "It's not about the steak anymore, Linda," I said. My voice was steady, the kind of calm I use when a board meeting is about to go off the rails, and I need everyone to realize who's in charge. "I want you to look at this." I didn't point. I didn't have to. The mold was so vibrant, it practically glowed under the reading lamp. She leaned over, barely glancing at the tray. She didn't gasp. She didn't apologize. She didn't even flinch. "It's sourdough," she said, her tone dripping with a condescension so thick you could have spread it on a cracker. "Sometimes the fermentation process creates different colors in the crust. If you weren't so intent on being difficult, you'd realize that's just how high-end artisanal bread looks. Now, do you want the salad or should I just take the whole tray away?" I felt a hollow laugh bubble up in my throat, but I choked it down. Artisanal. She was looking at a patch of blue decay that could probably take down a horse and calling it fermentation. It was a lie so bold it was almost impressive. But it wasn't just a lie. It was a test. She wanted to see if I'd back down. She wanted to see if the man in the hoodie would just say sorry and eat his rotten chicken in silence. "Linda," I said, finally looking her in the eye. Her eyes were hard, like 2 marbles dropped in a bowl of ice. I grew up in a house where we knew exactly what mold looked like, because we couldn't always afford to throw it away. I know the difference between a sourdough starter and a health hazard. This isn't artisanal. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen. The tech bro next to me, Mr. Harrison, cleared his throat. He looked at my tray, then at Linda. "Hey, she's right. Man, she's wrong. That's definitely mold. I can see it from here. It's actually kinda gross." Linda's face flushed a deep, angry red. She didn't like being corrected by the right kind of passenger. She turned her venom back on me, leaning in so close I could smell the coffee and stale mints on her breath. "Listen to me carefully," she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage she wasn't even trying to hide anymore. "I've been flying these routes for 15 years. I know who belongs in these seats and who's just taking up space. You come on here dressed like you're headed to a gym. You demand things we don't have. And then you try to pull a stunt with the food to get a free flight. I've seen your type before. You think because you found a way to scramble into a first-class seat that you're suddenly special. You're not. You're a distraction. And if you press that button one more time, I will have the captain radio ahead for an escort. Do you understand? The escort. The threat of the police. It's the ultimate weapon, isn't it? The reminder that no matter how much money is in my bank account, no matter how many people I employ, in the eyes of a woman like Linda, I'm always one distressing moment away from a pair of handcuffs. I felt that old, familiar tightness in my chest. It's a weight I've carried since I was a boy in Detroit, watching my father pull over and put his hands on the dashboard before the police officer even got out of the car. It's the black tax, the extra cost of just living your life while people wait for you to fail, wait for you to get angry, wait for you to give them a reason to crush you. I looked at my hands. They were steady. I've spent 20 years learning how to swallow fire and breathe out ice. I thought about the phone in my pocket. I thought about the fact that I had the personal cell phone number of the man whose name was on the tail of this airplane. I could have ended her career right there. I could have ended her week. But I didn't. Not yet. I understand exactly what's happening here. "Linda," I said, my voice dropping even lower, vibrating in the small space between us. "But I think you've misunderstood who's in charge of this conversation." She let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "Oh, you think you're in charge? That's adorable. Enjoy your artisanal bread. Or don't. I don't care." She turned and walked away, her hips swaying with a triumphant swagger. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd put the hoodie guy back in his box. Around us, the other passengers were whispering. I could feel their eyes, some sympathetic, some annoyed that their quiet flight had been interrupted by drama, and some just staring at the moldy bread like it was a car crash they couldn't look away from. "Mister?" Harrison leaned over again. "Dude, that was messed up. You want my steak? I haven't touched it. Seriously. Take it." I looked at the kid. He was sincere. He saw a man being mistreated, and he wanted to help. It was a kind gesture, but it felt like a bandage on a gunshot wound. "I appreciate it, truly," I said, "but I think I've lost my appetite for anything this airline has to offer." I reached into the seat pocket and pulled out the safety manual. Not because I needed to know where the exits were. I've flown enough to know them by heart. But because I needed to see if the magazine was there. And there it was. The Global Executive. It was the current issue. The one with the high gloss cover. I didn't open it. I just let it sit on my lap. The face of the man on the cover hidden by my hand. I started thinking about the path that led me to this seat. I thought about my first job out of college, working in a warehouse, pulling double shifts until my boots were soaked with sweat, and my back felt like it was made of broken glass. I remembered the first time I walked into a boardroom and felt the air go out of the room because the new director wasn't what they expected. I'd spent my entire life being the first or the only, and the higher I went, the more I realized that the suits get more expensive, but the ghosts stay the same. The mold on that bread wasn't just a mistake. It was a manifestation of the rot that stays hidden until someone dares to look under the surface. Linda didn't see a CEO. She didn't see a father, a husband, or a philanthropist. She saw a skin tone and a hoodie, and she decided that was enough to justify serving me garbage. She decided that my dignity was less important than her ego. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call the CEO of the airline. Not yet. Instead, I opened the camera app. I took a photo of the bread. Then I took a photo of the tray, making sure to get the first-class insignia in the frame. Then, I took a photo of the plastic cup, the one that was so different from the crystal glasses everyone else had. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching myself from the ceiling. This wasn't about anger anymore. Anger is messy. Anger is what they expect. This was about strategy. This was about the slow, deliberate movement of a man who knows how to dismantle a system piece by piece. A few minutes later, the second flight attendant, a younger woman named Sarah, came by with the wine top-offs. She looked at my tray, saw the soaked napkin and the untouched salad, and then her eyes landed on the roll. Her face went pale. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "Sir, I'm so sorry. Let me get that away from you immediately." She reached for the tray, but I gently put my hand on the edge of it. "No, Sarah, leave it." Linda told me it was artisanal. She said it was part of the fermentation process. Sarah looked toward the galley, then back at me. I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew Linda was the senior, the one with the power in that cabin, but she also knew what she was looking at was wrong. She said that? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. She did, and she told me if I complained again, she'd have the authorities waiting for me at JFK. Sarah looked like she was about to cry. "Sir, please, let me get you something else. I can go to the pilot's galley. They have different meals. I can find you a fresh steak. I know there's one left in the oven that we were holding for a crew change. I don't want a steak." "Sarah," I said, my voice kind but firm, "I want to know why your colleague felt comfortable saying those things to me." Sarah didn't have an answer. She just stood there, her fingers twitching at her sides, caught between the loyalty to her coworker and the basic human decency she knew she should be providing. She eventually just whispered another "I'm so sorry" and hurried away, her head down. I looked back at the moldy roll. It was starting to feel like a companion, a silent partner in this long, dark night. I thought about the irony of it all. My company's software was currently running the logistics for this very flight, the data that told them how much fuel to load, how to route around the storm over the Midwest, and even the inventory of the food on that cart. It all went through servers that I owned. I was the ghost in their machine, the invisible force that kept them moving. And yet, here I was, being told I was taking up space. I leaned over and picked up my leather bag. I pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook and a pen. I didn't write about the bread. I wrote about the feeling. I wrote about the way the air in the cabin felt thinner, not because of the altitude, but because of the pressure of being watched. I wrote about the heart-ripping pain of realizing that, no matter how far you run, the shadow of other people's prejudice is always faster. The flight moved on. The tech bro eventually fell asleep, his expensive headphones glowing with a soft blue light. Most of the cabin was dark now, the only light coming from the occasional movie screen or the glow of a reading lamp. I stayed awake. I watched the stars through the small window, tiny pinpricks of light in an endless black sea. They looked so peaceful, so indifferent to the small, ugly things happening inside this metal tube. I found myself thinking about my grandfather. He was a sharecropper in Mississippi before he moved north. He used to tell me, "Marcus, they can take your land, they can take your money, but they can't take your mind unless you give it to them." He lived his whole life with his head held high, even when the world tried to bow it. I felt his presence in that seat next to me. I felt the strength of every man and woman who had endured much worse than a moldy bread roll so that I could sit in this cabin. This wasn't just about me. If I let this go, the next person in this seat, the young black student traveling on a scholarship, the grandmother going to see her grandkids for the first time, they would have to deal with Linda. They would have to swallow the mold. And I couldn't let that happen. I looked toward the galley again. I could see Linda's silhouette. She was leaning against the counter, scrolling on her phone, probably complaining to a friend about the difficult passenger in 1A. She had no idea that the difficult passenger was currently drafting a series of events that would change her life forever. I felt a strange sense of peace. It was the peace that comes when you stop being the victim and start being the architect. I reached out and touched the magazine on my lap. I ran my thumb over the glossy paper, feeling the edge of the cover. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to make a scene. I just needed to wait. We were 3 hours from New York. 3 hours until the wheels touched the ground. 3 hours until the world Linda thought she lived in collided with the reality she had tried so hard to ignore. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating my face in the dark cabin. I didn't go to the airline's website. I went to my internal corporate portal. I looked at the contract renewal for this airline. It was sitting on my virtual desk, waiting for my electronic signature. It was a multi-million-dollar agreement, the kind that keeps a company's stock price stable. I stared at the sign button for a long time. Then, I looked at the moldy bread. I could almost see it growing, the blue tendrils reaching out, reclaiming the wheat, turning something meant for nourishment into something poisonous. I looked at my cup of lukewarm tap water. I thought about the word artisanal. I thought about the look in Linda's eyes when she told me I didn't belong. I didn't sign the contract. Instead, I opened a new email window. I typed in the address of the CEO of the airline, a man named Robert who I'd played golf with at Pebble Beach last summer. Robert was a good man, a man who prided himself on inclusive excellence. I wondered how he'd feel about the excellence being served in 1A. I started typing. I didn't use flowery language. I didn't use corporate buzzwords. I just told the truth. I told him about the steak that didn't exist. I told him about the plastic cup. I told him about the fermentation. And most importantly, I told him about the escort. I attached the photos. Each one felt like a stone being placed on a scale. Bread, cup, tray. The scale was tipping. I hit send. The message sent notification popped up, a tiny green check mark that felt like a victory lap. I closed the laptop and tucked it back into my bag. Now, we wait. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I listened to the sounds of the plane, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of a blanket, every sigh of a sleeping passenger. I felt the vibration of the floor against my sneakers. An hour passed. Then 2. The fastened seatbelt sign chimed, a double tone that echoed through the quiet cabin. We were beginning our descent. The lights slowly began to rise, the artificial sunrise of the cabin waking the sleepers. I saw Mr. Harrison stir, rubbing his eyes and looking around. He looked at my tray, which Sarah had never dared to move, and then he looked at me. "You okay, man?" he whispered. "I'm just fine," I said, and I meant it. I saw Linda emerge from the galley. She looked refreshed, like she'd had a nice break. She was wearing her landing smile now, the one she saves for the end of the flight when she wants people to remember her fondly as they leave. She started moving down the aisle, collecting trash. When she got to me, she didn't look at my face. She just reached for the tray. Her movements were quick, dismissive. She wanted the evidence gone. "I'll take that," she said, her voice chirpy and fake. I didn't let go of the tray. I kept my hand firmly on the edge. She looked up, her smile faltering. "Sir, I need to stow the tray for landing. I think we should leave it right here." "Linda," I said. She frowned, the old irritation bubbling back to the surface. "We are landing. It's a safety regulation. Don't start this again." "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I'm just making sure the evidence stays exactly where it is." She pulled at the tray, but I didn't budge. She hissed under her breath. "Fine. Be a child. I'll just report you for non-compliance." She moved on to the next row, her face a mask of fury. I watched her go, and I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't triumph. It was a deep, soul-shaking realization that the world I had built for myself was about to protect me in a way I'd never had to ask for before. I reached down and picked up the magazine from my lap. I finally turned it over. My own face stared back at me. Marcus Sterling, CEO of Sterling Logistics, under the headline, "The Man Redefining the American Dream." I looked at the photo, then at the back of Linda's head. I wondered if she'd ever read it. I wondered if she'd even recognized the man in the hoodie as the man in the charcoal gray suit on the cover. As the plane's nose dipped and we began to cut through the thick clouds over New York, the cabin vibrated with the force of the wind. I could see the lights of Long Island through the window, a shimmering carpet of gold and white. It looked beautiful. It looked like progress. I felt the landing gear drop with a heavy thud clack that shook the floor. My heart was beating in time with the engines. I looked at the Moldy roll one last time. It had shifted slightly on the plate, looking even more pathetic in the bright landing lights. Linda was back at her station, buckled in for landing. She was staring straight ahead, her jaw tight. She thought she was finished with me. She thought that in 10 minutes, I'd be just another face disappearing into the terminal. She had no idea. The wheels hit the tarmac with a jolt, the reverse thrusters roaring as we slowed down on the runway. I watched the airport lights blur past the window. JFK, my city, my home, as we taxied toward the gate. I saw something unusual. Usually, there are just a few ground crew members waiting, but as we pulled toward Gate 4, I could see several people standing on the jet bridge through the terminal windows. 2 of them were in dark suits. One of them was holding a tablet, and standing right in the center was a man I recognized instantly. The airport's general manager. The plane came to a final stop with a gentle hiss of the brakes. The fastened seatbelt sign went off with a final chime. I didn't move. I sat in 1A, my hand still resting on the edge of the tray with the moldy bread. Linda unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, smoothing her skirt. She moved to the door, her hand on the lever. She looked back at the cabin, her eyes skimming over me with a look of pure, cold triumph. She was ready to usher me out of her life. "Thank you for flying with us," she started to say as she pulled the lever and the heavy door began to swing open. But the words died in her throat. The man in the lead, the one in the sharpest suit, didn't wait for her to step aside. He stepped onto the plane, his eyes scanning the first-class cabin with a frantic intensity. Behind him, 3 other men followed, their faces grim. Linda blinked, her fake smile faltering. "Sir, We're not ready for boarding yet. We're still deplaning." The man didn't even look at her. He pushed past her like she was a ghost. He stopped right at the edge of my row. He looked at me. Then his eyes dropped to the tray. He saw the mold. He saw the plastic cup. He saw the soaked napkin. He looked back at me, and I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. "Mr. Sterling," he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't get up. I just looked at him. Then I looked at Linda, who was standing frozen by the door, her mouth hanging open as the cold New York air began to swirl into the cabin. I felt a wave of cold clarity wash over me. The wait was over. The chess pieces were exactly where they needed to be. I looked at the tray, then back at the man in the suit, and I finally let a small, weary smile touch my lips. I gripped the armrests of my seat, my knuckles turning white as I prepared to stand up and face the storm I had just unleashed. The leather of the armrests felt like the only thing keeping me anchored to the earth as the cabin air, once stagnant and heavy with the scent of dismissal, was suddenly charged with the frantic energy of the men who had just burst through the door. I didn't move a muscle. I kept my hands exactly where they were, knuckles white, fingers gripping the hide of the seat. I wanted to feel every vibration of this shift. For 6 hours, I had been a ghost, a nuisance, a type to be managed and humiliated. Now, I was the only person in the room who mattered, and the weight of that transition felt like a physical pressure against my chest. The man in the lead, whom I now recognized as David Miller, the regional director of operations, didn't just look worried. He looked like he was witnessing the slow-motion collapse of a skyscraper. He ignored the tech bro in 1B. He ignored the other passengers grabbing their bags. He stepped into my personal space, his eyes darting from my face to the tray table with a terrified intensity that made the air between us feel thin. "Mr. Sterling," he said again, his voice cracking slightly on the last syllable. We are profoundly sorry. We received the message. We came as soon as the flight was on the ground." Behind him, Linda was still standing by the galley bulkhead. The landing smile she had been wearing was gone, replaced by a twitching, pale mask. She looked at David, then at me, her brain clearly trying to reconcile the image of the man in the gray hoodie with the tone of absolute deference coming from her superior. "David," she stammered, her voice high and thin, like a wire about to snap. "What's going on? This passenger, he's been non-compliant the whole flight. He's been making scenes about the catering. I was just about to report." David turned on her so fast I heard the fabric of his suit jacket whistle. "Be quiet, Linda," he snapped. It wasn't a professional reprimand. It was a desperate command for survival. He turned back to me, his hands trembling as he gestured toward the tray. May I see the bread?" "Sir." I pulled my hand back slowly, exposing the blue forest of mold in all its ugly glory. In the bright, unforgiving light of the open cabin door, the decay looked even more obscene. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a testament to total negligence. David leaned in, his face going a sickly shade of gray. I watched a bead of sweat break from his hairline and roll down his temple. "My God," he whispered. "Artisanal," I said. The word felt like a stone in my mouth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The quietness of my tone was a weapon, honed by decades of boardrooms where the loudest man usually has the least to say. That was the word your lead attendant used. She told me the fermentation process creates these colors. She told me I should be grateful to even have a seat in this cabin. The tech bro in 1B was fully awake now, his eyes wide as he watched the scene. She really did. Man, he piped up, his voice echoing in the hush. She treated him like he was a stowaway. I've never seen anything like it. And the water. She gave him tap water in a plastic cup while she was pouring me champagne. David's head dropped. He looked like a man waiting for the axe to fall. He knew what was at stake. Sterling Logistics didn't just move freight. We moved the very lifeblood of this airline's supply chain. One word from me, and their entire ground operation would grind to a halt within 48 hours. "Linda," David said, his voice dangerously low, not looking back at her. "Go to the terminal office. Now. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch your phone. Just go." "But David, go!" he roared. The sound made the remaining passengers in the front rows jump. Linda looked at me one last time. There was no triumph in her eyes now. There was a dawning, soul-shaking realization of the magnitude of her error. She hadn't just humiliated a passenger. She had humiliated the wrong kind of passenger. She turned and fled down the jet bridge, her heels clicking a frantic, uneven rhythm on the metal floor. I finally stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my spine was straight. I felt the height of my body, the breadth of my shoulders. I felt like the man on the cover of that magazine again. I reached down and picked up the issue of the Global Executive, holding it out toward David. "You know, David," I said, my voice echoing through the nearly empty cabin. "I didn't dress like this to test anyone. I dressed like this because I was tired. I dressed like this because I thought, in a seat that costs more than most people make in 3 months, I might find a little bit of peace. I thought my money had bought me the right to be comfortable." David took the magazine, his thumb brushing over my face on the cover. He didn't look at it. He couldn't. "Mr. Sterling, there are no excuses. This is a catastrophic failure of our standards. It's not who we are, isn't it?" I asked. I stepped out into the aisle, my hoodie feeling like a suit of armor now, because from where I was sitting for the last 6 hours, it seemed exactly like who you are. The mold on that bread, that's just a symptom. The real rot is in the way your staff decides who deserves dignity and who deserves garbage, based on the clothes they wear and the color of their skin. I walked toward the door, my footsteps slow and deliberate. David and his team parted for me like the Red Sea. They didn't just move, they shrank. I could feel the empathy of the younger flight attendant, Sarah, who was standing near the door with tears in her eyes. I paused for a second and looked at her. "Thank you for the water, Sarah," I said softly. "You were the only thing about this flight that wasn't broken." She nodded, unable to speak. As I stepped onto the jet bridge, the air changed. The pressurized, artificial environment of the plane gave way to the drafty, bustling smell of JFK, a mixture of jet fuel, floor wax, and the frantic energy of 8 million lives intersecting. David followed me, walking a respectful 2 paces behind, like an aide-de-camp to a general who had just lost a war. "We have a car waiting, Mr. Sterling," David said, his voice desperate to please. "We've cleared your luggage. It's already in the trunk. We've arranged for a full refund and a credit for—" "Stop," I said, halting in the middle of the bridge. I turned to face him. The fluorescent lights overhead were humming, a buzzing sound that felt like it was coming from inside my own skull. "I don't want your credits, David, and I don't want a car. My driver is already waiting at the curb." "Of course, sir, but please, if there's anything—" "There is one thing," I said. I looked him dead in the eyes. I want that tray preserved. I want the bread, the cup, and the napkin. I want them sent to your corporate lab for analysis. And I want the results on my desk by 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. And then I want a meeting with Robert. David swallowed hard. Robert was the CEO of the airline. I'll make the call immediately. I turned and continued down the jet bridge. Every step away from that plane felt like a layer of skin was being grafted back onto my body. The humiliation was still there, a dull ache in the pit of my stomach, but it was being overshadowed by a grim sense of purpose. I wasn't just Marcus Sterling, the victim of a bad flight. I was Marcus Sterling, the man who was going to make sure this never happened again. As I entered the terminal, the world opened up. The vastness of JFK's Terminal 4 was a sea of faces, people from every corner of the globe, rushing toward their destinies. I saw a group of young black men sitting by a gate, laughing, wearing hoodies just like mine. I looked at them and felt a sudden, sharp pang of protectiveness. They were young. They were full of hope. They hadn't yet learned that the world would try to serve them moldy bread the second they stopped looking the part. I walked through the terminal, my head held high. I felt the eyes of the travelers on me, not the suspicious squints from the plane, but the casual glances you give to a man who moves with authority. It was a strange mothun, a paradox that I've lived with my whole life. In one room, I'm a king. In another, I'm a threat. And the transition between the two can happen in the time it takes to walk from a boardroom to a boarding gate. I remembered my father again. He was a man who worked 3 jobs and never owned a suit that wasn't secondhand. He used to tell me, "Marcus, they'll try to make you feel like you're walking on borrowed ground. You make sure you stomp so hard they remember you were there." I was stomping now. Every footfall on that terminal floor was a reminder that I belonged here. I reached the exit, and the sliding glass doors hissed open, letting in the cool, damp night air of New York City. The city felt alive, a cacophony of sirens, yellow cabs honking, and the distant rumble of the Van Wyck Expressway. It was chaotic, it was dirty, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. My black SUV was idling at the curb. My driver, Elias, stepped out the moment he saw me. He's been with me for 10 years. He doesn't see the CEO or the hoodie. He just sees me. He opened the back door, his face a calm anchor in the storm of my day. "Long flight, sir?" he asked, taking my leather bag. "Longer than you can imagine." "Elias," I said. I climbed into the back seat. The interior of the car was dark and quiet, a sanctuary of soft leather and tinted glass. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, but the image of that blue mold was burned into my retinas. It was a heart-ripping pain that wouldn't go away just because I was off the plane. It was the pain of knowing that no matter how much you achieve, the foundations of the world you live in are still built on the same old rotten timber. I pulled out my phone. It had been vibrating in my pocket for the last 20 minutes. I had dozens of missed calls and messages. One of them was from Robert, the airline CEO. "Marcus, I just heard. I'm horrified. Please tell me you're okay. I'm at my home in Connecticut, but I can be in the city in an hour. We need to talk." I stared at the screen. I thought about the steak Linda said didn't exist. I thought about the escort she threatened me with. I thought about the way she looked at my sneakers like they were a crime against humanity. I didn't reply to Robert. I needed the night to let the anger settle into something more useful. I needed to be the CEO, not the wounded man. As the SUV pulled away from the curb and merged into the river of lights headed toward Manhattan, I looked out the window at the airport receding behind us. The control tower stood like a lighthouse, guiding planes in from all over the world. How many other people were on those planes right now, being made to feel small? How many people were eating the mold because they didn't have a magazine cover to hide behind? The car moved smoothly, the suspension soaking up the potholes of the New York streets. I watched the skyline of Manhattan rise in the distance, the Empire State Building glowing with a steady, defiant light. It was a city built by people who were told they didn't belong, by people who were served the scraps and turned them into gold. I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of exhaustion. Not the physical tiredness of a long flight, but a soul weariness that comes from fighting a war that never seems to end. You win a battle, you close a deal, you humiliate the person who tried to humiliate you. But the war goes on. The mold keeps growing. I reached into my bag and pulled out my notebook. I turned to a fresh page and began to write. I didn't write about the airline. I didn't write about Linda. I wrote about the concept of belonging. I wrote about the walls we build around ourselves and the ways we try to tear down the walls of others. I wrote about the noi dao se long, the heart-shredding pain of being a stranger in your own home. The SUV turned onto the bridge, the tires humming on the metal grates. Below us, the East River was a dark, churning mass, reflecting the neon signs of the city. I felt the scale of the city, the millions of stories happening all at once, each one a struggle for dignity, for respect, for a place at the table. I realized then that this wasn't just about a flight. This was about the transition I was going through. I was moving from a man who reacts to a man who transforms. I didn't want Linda to just lose her job. I wanted the system that produced her to be dismantled. I wanted the artisanal lies to be exposed for what they were, cover for a deep-seated rot. As we reached the other side of the bridge and descended into the canyons of Midtown, the lights of the city became blinding. I saw the people on the sidewalks, the tourists, the office workers, the homeless, the dreamers. They were all moving, all striving. I thought about the tech bro, Mr. Harrison. He was probably in a cab right now, telling his friends about the crazy thing that happened on his flight. To him, it was a story. To me, it was my life. That's the difference. That's the gap we have to bridge. I looked down at my hands again. They were finally relaxed. The tension had drained away, leaving a cold, hard resolve in its place. I knew what I had to do. I knew the moves I had to make. The SUV slowed to a crawl as we hit the traffic near Grand Central. I watched a man in a tattered coat standing on a corner, holding a sign. People walked past him like he was a piece of street furniture. He was the invisible man of the terminal, the one who doesn't even get served the moldy bread because no one even acknowledges he's hungry. I felt a sudden urge to get out of the car, to walk among the people, to feel the grit of the city under my sneakers. But I stayed in the dark sanctuary of the back seat. I had work to do. I had a world to change. I pulled out my phone again and finally typed a response to Robert. Robert, I'm home. I'm not okay, but I will be. We'll talk at 9:00 a.m. Bring David and bring the tray. I hit send and watched the message fly off into the digital ether. The SUV turned onto my street, a quiet, tree-lined block on the Upper West Side. The brownstones stood like silent sentinels, their windows glowing with the warm light of families having dinner, watching TV, living their lives. I felt a sudden, sharp longing for my own home, for the smell of my wife's cooking, for the sound of my daughter's laughter. Elias pulled the car to a stop in front of my building. The doorman, Arthur, stepped forward, a wide smile on his face. He's been there for 20 years. He knows my story. He knows where I came from. Welcome home, Mr. Sterling, he said, opening the car door. How was the trip? I stepped out of the car, the cool air hitting my face. I looked at Arthur, a man who has spent his life opening doors for people who sometimes don't even see him. I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. It was a long one. Arthur, I said, but I'm back now. I walked into the lobby, the marble floors gleaming under the chandeliers. I felt the transition again, the move from the street to the sanctuary. But this time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I felt like I was entering the war room. I took the elevator up to the penthouse. The doors opened directly into my foyer. The apartment was quiet. The only sound, the distant hum of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Real water, in a crystal glass. I watched the bubbles rise to the surface, clear and pure. I sat down at my mahogany dining table and opened my bag. I pulled out the magazine one last time. I looked at the man on the cover. He looked confident. He looked untouchable. I looked at the gray hoodie I was still wearing. It was stained with a little bit of the water Linda had sloshed onto me. It was a badge of honor now. It was the reminder that you can't dress up well enough to hide from the truth of this country. I reached for my laptop, the metal cold against my skin. I didn't open it. I just sat there in the dark, the lights of the city twinkling behind me like 1,000 unread messages. I felt the weight of the silence in the room. It was the same silence that had been in the cabin when Linda threatened me. But this time, the silence belonged to me. I thought about the Noy Dao Se Long again. It's a pain that doesn't go away, but it changes you. It makes you sharper. It makes you harder. It makes you the kind of man who can face a forest of blue mold and see the path through it. I stood up and walked to the window. The city was spread out before me, a vast, glowing map of human ambition and human failure. Somewhere out there, Linda was sitting in the dark room, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. Somewhere out there, Robert was preparing his apologies. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw the gray hoodie. I saw the tired eyes. I saw the man who had been humiliated and the man who had been vindicated. They were the same man. I reached out and touched the glass, the coldness seeping into my fingertips. I felt the vibration of the city, the heartbeat of New York. I was home, but the flight wasn't over. Not really. The landing was just the beginning of the real work. I turned away from the window and headed toward my bedroom. I needed to sleep. I needed to be ready for 9:00 a.m. I needed to be the storm. As I laid my head on the pillow, I could still feel the phantom motion of the plane, the slow descent through the clouds. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, my mind already rehearsing the words I would say to the men who thought a plastic cup and a moldy roll were enough for a man like me. I drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, the silence of the penthouse echoing the silence of the sky, until the first light of dawn began to creep over the edge of the horizon, signaling the start of a day that would change everything. The sun didn't just rise over the East River that morning. It cut through my bedroom blinds like a surgical blade, cold and unforgiving. I didn't need the alarm clock to tell me it was time to wake up. My body was already buzzing, every nerve ending vibrating with the residue of that flight. I stayed still for a moment, listening to the muffled sounds of the city waking up below. The distant hiss of tires on wet pavement, and the low hum of a world that never stops moving. The silence of the penthouse was gone, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. each second bringing me closer to the 9:00 a.m. reckoning. I stood up and walked to the bathroom, catching my reflection in the steam-free mirror. I looked tired. There were lines around my eyes that hadn't been there a decade ago, etched by thousands of hours of building something out of nothing. I splashed cold water on my face, feeling the chill snap my senses into focus. Today wasn't a day for the gray hoodie. Today was a day for the armor. I went to my closet and pulled out a charcoal gray suit, hand-tailored in London. The fabric was so fine it felt like a second skin. A suit that cost more than the car Linda probably drove. I picked out a crisp white shirt, ironed to a razor's edge, and a silk tie the color of a deep, bruised plum. As I tightened the knot at my throat, I felt the CEO Marcus fully take over. It's a mothun I live with every day, having to dress in a certain way just to ensure my humanity isn't up for debate. I wasn't putting on a costume. I was putting on a message. I was telling the world that if you want to play in the big leagues, you better be ready for the heavy hitters. By 8:45 a.m., I was standing in the lobby of the airline's corporate headquarters in Long Island City. It was a glass and steel cathedral, dedicated to the art of movement. But as I walked through the revolving doors, the air felt thick with tension. The receptionist didn't ask for my ID. She didn't ask if I had an appointment. She just stood up, her face pale, and gestured toward the private elevator. "They're waiting for you, Mr. Sterling," she whispered. The elevator ride was silent. I watched the floor numbers climb, feeling the pressure in my ears, a ghost of the sensation I'd felt on the plane. When the doors opened, David was there. He looked like he hadn't slept a wink. His eyes were bloodshot, and his tie was slightly askew. He looked like a man who had spent the night staring at the wreckage of his own career. "Mr. Sterling," he said, stepping forward but keeping a respectful distance. "Robert is in the boardroom. He's ready for you." I didn't say a word. I just walked past him, my heels clicking on the polished marble floors. The boardroom was at the end of a long, sun-drenched hallway. As I entered, I saw Robert, the CEO of the airline, standing by the window. He was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of relaxed confidence that comes from generations of wealth. But when he turned to face me, that confidence was gone. He looked haunted. In the center of the massive mahogany table sat a small, sterile-looking silver tray, and there it was, the moldy roll. It was sitting under a glass dome now, like a piece of cursed jewelry. Beside it was the plastic cup, still holding a few drops of lukewarm water, and the stained linen napkin. Seeing them there, in this temple of corporate power, made the whole thing feel even more surreal. It was the Noi Dao Selong, the heart-shredding pain of seeing the evidence of your own humiliation treated like a laboratory specimen. "Marcus," Robert said, stepping toward me with his hand outstretched. I don't even know where to begin. I've read the reports. I've seen the photos. I've talked to the crew. I didn't take his hand. I just walked to the table and stared at the bread. I'm not here for an apology. "Robert," I said. My voice was low, steady, and carried the weight of the 6 hours I'd spent in 1A. "I'm here to find out how the system you built allowed this to happen." Robert sighed, his shoulders sagging. He sat down at the head of the table, gesturing for me to sit opposite him. David scurried into a corner chair, notebook open but his pen trembling. "We've already taken action," Robert started. His voice regained a bit of its corporate polish. "Linda has been terminated, effective immediately, not just suspended, fired. Her behavior was a gross violation of our core values. The rest of the crew is being put through mandatory sensitivity training, and we're conducting a full audit of our catering partner in San Francisco. I lean back in the chair, the leather creaking softly. Linda is a symptom. Robert, she's not the disease. You fire her, and another one takes her place tomorrow. Because the culture says it's okay to look at a man in a hoodie and decide he's not worth the effort of a fresh piece of bread. You audit the caterer, and they'll just find a different way to cut corners. What do you want, Marcus? Robert asked. He sounded genuinely lost. You want me to step down? You want us to pull the logistics contract? Because I know you have the power to do that. If you walk away, we lose 40% of our efficiency by the end of the month. I looked at him for a long time. The CEO, Marcus, wanted to crush him. I wanted to pull the contract, watch their stock price plummet, and let the world know why. It would have been easy. It would have been justice. But then I thought about the thousands of employees at Sterling Logistics whose mortgages depended on that contract. I thought about the people at the airline who weren't like Linda. People like Sarah, who was terrified but still tried to help. I'm not pulling the contract, I said. I saw David let out a breath he'd been holding for 10 minutes. But I'm changing the terms. I leaned forward, my elbows on the mahogany. From now on, Sterling Logistics isn't just your vendor. We're your auditor. Every flight, every crew, every catering hub, my team gets full access to the data. We're building a transparency protocol. If a passenger gets treated like I did, I don't want to hear about it 2 days later. I want it flagged in real time. And I want a fund established, $5 million a year, out of your profit margin, to support hospitality training for underrepresented youth in the cities you serve. Robert blinked. He hadn't expected a partnership. He'd expected a war. That's a significant investment. Marcus, it's the price of the ticket. Robert, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. And as you know, first-class seats are expensive. The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the sound of my own heart beating. Robert looked at the moldy bread, then back at me. He nodded slowly. I'll have the legal team draft the addendum by the end of the day. We'll make it happen. I stood up. The meeting was over. I'd achieved what I came for, but the victory felt heavy. I walked to the glass dome and looked at the blue mold one last time. It looked under a glass dome now, like a piece of cursed jewelry. Beside it was the plastic cup, still holding a few drops of lukewarm water, and the stained linen napkin. I looked at the moldy bread one last time. It looked smaller now, less threatening. It was just a fungus, a biological error. The real danger had been the silence that surrounded it. Marcus, Robert called out as I reached the door. I stopped and looked back. Why didn't you just destroy us? You had every right, because destroying things is easy. Robert, I said, building something that lasts, something that actually fixes the rot. That's the hard part. And I'm a builder. I walked out of the boardroom and down the hall. David caught up with me at the elevator. Mr. Sterling, first, I wanted to personally apologize. I was the one who oversaw that route's logistics. I should have caught the catering issues. I looked at him. He was a young man, probably the same age as the tech bro from the flight. He looked terrified. Don't just catch the issues, David, I said as the elevator doors opened. See the people. If you can't do that, you're in the wrong business. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close on his worried face. As I descended, I felt a strange sense of closure. The Nuit au Salon wasn't gone, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a wound. It was a scar. And scars are just reminders that you survived. When I walked back out into the New York sun, the city felt different. It was still loud, still chaotic, but I felt like I was finally in sync with it. I started walking toward Central Park, my suit jacket slung over my shoulder. I didn't want the car. I wanted to be among the people. I found a bench near the sheep meadow and sat down. Around me, the world was in full bloom. Kids were running, dogs were barking, and people of every color and background were soaking in the sun. I saw a group of teenagers sitting on the grass, one of them wearing a hoodie, just like the one I'd worn on the plane. He was laughing, sharing a bag of chips with his friends. He looked free. He looked like he belonged. I pulled out my phone and looked at the comments on my last post. Thousands of people had shared their stories. Stories of being ignored, being belittled, being served their own versions of moldy bread. I felt a swell of emotion in my chest. I wasn't alone. We were never alone. "I hear you," I whispered to the screen. "I hear all of you." I realized then that my journey wasn't just about a CEO in a first-class seat. It was about the millions of people who don't have the title, but have the same heart. It was about the hope that we can demand better, not just for ourselves, but for the kid on the grass who doesn't even know the world is waiting to judge him. I thought about my grandfather's words one last time. "Stomp so hard they remember you were there." I had stomped. I had left my mark. And in doing so, maybe I'd made the ground a little more solid for the next person. The sun was warm on my face. I took a deep breath, the air smelling of grass and distant hot dog stands. It was the smell of life. It was the smell of a country that is still a work in progress, a country that can be both cruel and beautiful in the same heartbeat. I stood up and started walking again. I had more meetings, more deals, more mountains to climb. But I wasn't just climbing for myself anymore. I was carrying the stories of everyone who had been made to feel invisible. I was carrying the memory of the mold and the promise of the fresh bread. Before I go, I want to ask you one last thing. This story, it isn't just mine. It's ours. If you've ever found the strength to stand up when someone tried to push you down, I want to hear about it. What was your moldy bread moment? How did you turn it into a victory? Let's keep this conversation going in the comments. We're building something here, and every voice matters. And hey, if this journey touched you, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. We have to be the ones to tell our own stories, or the world will tell them for us. I'm Marcus Sterling. I'm a CEO, a father, a son, and a man who knows the value of his seat. Thank you for walking this path with me. Stay strong, stay proud, and never, ever eat the mold. I'll see you in the next one. The park was buzzing as I walked toward the exit, the light of the afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows across the path. I felt light. I felt powerful. I felt like a man who had finally found his way home. Not just to a penthouse, but to himself. I reached into my pocket, felt the cold glass of my phone, and smiled. The world was waiting, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to meet it exactly as I was. As I stepped out onto Fifth Avenue, merging into the river of humanity, I didn't look back. I just kept moving forward, one steady, purposeful step at a time, toward a future that we were going to build together.